I have with me Karina Ruiz, who's with BRIC Architecture, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
We're sitting in the annual conference of 2019 EDspace, and it's a great conference, a lot of programs, and I was fascinated some of the topics that you're here to talk about.
Sure.
And one is transformation.
Yeah.
You know, education's going through very dramatic change, at least they're trying to change.
That's right.
They're talking about it. How challenging has that been for you as an architect?
You know, I wouldn't say that it's been challenging as much as it's been refreshing, right? So I think education has kind of been in this transformative state for a long time, but the thing that has really, I think, brought me the most sense of satisfaction and a feeling of hopefulness has been the fact that I am no longer having the conversation about the fact that we need change, right? That the system that we have is working, right? Which not that long ago, I was still having those conversations, right?
Denial,
and it wasn't so much denial as just, you know, it's good enough, right? And so, and with all these reforms that are constantly being pushed into education, there was kind of an intolerance for it. But I think the majority of the conversations that I'm having now recognize immediately that there is this need for kind of a transformational change that is necessary in the way that that our kids are learning. I wouldn't even say necessarily in teaching and learning or in education, but just the way in which our kids are being engaged to learn about their world is different. You know, the world is different for them. And so for us, as architects, what that means is that we get to participate in conversations around first of all, the need for that change, and then how that can manifest. And not just kind of how it manifests in buildings, which is obviously the thing that we're hired to do, but I think when done well and done in concert with pedagogical advances and approaches to education, that's when you kind of get the magic, right? And so I think that transformation that we're talking about has incredible power, and it's really exciting to be kind of at the forefront of that. But then we also recognize that it's also scary, you know, for a lot of folks that are most directly impacted by that transformation, right? Teachers, administrators, students. The students are not afraid of anything, right? They'll kind of go with the flow. But you know, for a lot of teachers, asking them to take on more than they're already overwhelmed with is scary. And so, you know, it's easy for me to dismiss their concerns as, you know, this is a teacher that's just stuck in their ways, they don't want to change. But I think that's not being fair, and it's not being authentic to their experience to really to couch it in that way.
How do you know as a designer that you arrived at a solution that'll sustain itself?
I think I know that a solution will sustain itself when it's not just an architectural solution, when it's a solution that's paired with a teaching and learning approach that really formed the basis for the intentional design response, right? So I think that's when we are most successful, is when we can take and have a conversation about what we want for our kids, what we want for our communities, and then design intentionally in response to that.
Because years ago in the 70s, coming out of California was the open space plan.
Yeah, for sure.
And they thought they had it right.
Right.
And that was the biggest blunder.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, certainly in the 80s and 90s, primarily, we spent a lot of our time fixing those, right? Or quote unquote fixing them, putting walls in them. But I don't know necessarily that I agree that it was a design failure. I think what it was is a failure of connecting those two pieces that I talked about, right? Because what you were asking teachers to do and schools to do in an open plan is teach the exact same way that they taught in a closed school plan, and we're just going to remove the walls and totally screw with the acoustics, right? So obviously you can see why it was kind of set up to fail in that way. And so I think what gives me hope about where we are today is that it's a very intentional integration of the two. That when we're talking about having more open, flexible learning environments, we're doing it in the context of, first of all, acoustic attenuation, because that's a very real concern, but then also in ensuring that we're having the conversations about what the implications of that are for teaching and learning, and then how to provide the professional development necessary to train those that are going to be in that space to use it properly, right? So I think that's where I think the sustaining part of this comes, is when you are able to provide for space that is flexible and agile enough to adjust to changing pedagogies, but that those two are tied really closely to one another.
Seems like that effort of training goes away after the space has been designed, and that when that teacher who was part of the design committee leaves, and sometimes they're there for 20 years, and a new one comes in, they don't understand how to use the space, they don't like the space, or the new principal came from another educational system, don't like the space. Challenging.
It is very
challenging. You got the right
challenging.
solution that worked, but it worked for a moment of time until people changed.
Totally.
Or training dropped.
And I think that is the piece that we often forget as architects, that as much as we may be about concrete and steel, our buildings are used by people. And so unless you can have a human approach that speaks to that sustainability of concept, proof of concept, then I don't think you're going to be successful. So where we have had the most success has been when we have extended that development beyond just that first cohort, right? And you can do that in a variety of ways. One of the things that we have actually found to be the most powerful is to do enrichment classes with students themselves, because students will be, quite frankly, better shepherds of the building and stewards of kind of the original concepts than some of the adults in the building. And so, we've worked with kids at all ages, from elementary school through high school, to walk them through not only how the building is intended to be used, but why, right? What are those driving forces educationally, culturally, socially that we wanted to accomplish, led by not us as architects, but led by the folks in the district, right? So that our design is simply a reflection of what that district, that community wants and needs. And so walking them through that and being able to explain to them the value of that, and then making them almost docents of the building and of the process, and then creating kind of this this evergreen cycle of them then teaching the next class and teaching the next class. That's where we've seen it be really successful. And then also in districts where we've had the benefit of having longstanding relationships, right? I think those are the places where you do see benefit. But there are occasions when you do walk into a space and you know how it was intended to be used, and you walk in and you just go, okay, there's a big disconnect here. And that's disappointing. It's heartbreaking, because you know how much, not just effort from the design side, because that's what we get paid to do. I don't feel too bad about that. But just how much effort went into so many people coming together to think of this solution and contribute to it, and then to have it so easily discarded because of a simple personnel change. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So, with all the things going on in society today, kids don't feel safe. And you can't learn if you don't feel safe.
Right.
Some districts have taken somewhat of a pretty narrow view on school safety. And I know you'd like to talk about a more holistic view about the learning spaces and safety.
Yeah, I think the approach that I'm particularly attuned with, I have the pleasure of being the 2019 chair of the AIA's Committee on Architecture for Education, and we have worked really hard to understand this issue from all sides. We've had the pleasure of meeting with educators from Sandy Hook and from Parkland, and students that have been directly affected by that. And what we've come to realize is that if we spend 100% of our effort dealing with what I call kind of the interventional or responsive reactions to gun violence or school safety issues in schools, then we will only ever be putting Band-Aids on the solution or on the problem, right? So I am not going to say that we shouldn't be doing everything to protect our kids in the horrible event that this happens.
Right.
But I think we also need to be spending as much time talking about the more curative aspects, right? So, some of them are very simple. They're not even costly, right? You take, for example, admin suites where you usually bury counselors next to a disciplinarian in the back end of an office, and you pull them out of there and you put them closer to where kids are, so that, number one, they can be seen as a resource more readily, and that those who are charged with trying to support the mental health of our students are seeing them on a more regular basis, and they're seeing them not in crisis. So they're able to, see kids walking around outside of a library or a cafeteria and say, you know what, Dennis looks a little different. He's usually got a smile on his face, and today doesn't look like he's wearing one. Let me check in with him, right? And especially when we're in a situation where the counselors in our school have a load of over 400 students typically, you can understand that them constantly working in crisis mode is the natural course of business. And so for us, we want to look at those things that we're learning from healthcare design, the benefits of natural daylight, the benefits of having nature and introducing that into building, creating spaces for respite and for sort of personal connection as well, right? Creating informal learning environments and intentionally creating space for students to see one another, feel connected to one another, create a shared sense of accountability that's going to make them more likely to see something, say something, right? And all of those things that we hope at the end of the day prevent us from ever getting to a situation that makes itself to the news, right? And then you couple that with preparing in case it does, right? And I think what happens is, understandably so, our school districts, our communities are scared. And they are getting incredible pressure, not only from parents, but from vendors that come with if you just use this one product or whatever it is, this will be the solution to all the world's problems. And after having conversations with parents that were impacted by this directly, that lost children to gun violence in schools, I can understand the call for immediate action, right? Just give us these 10 things that we have to do, and everyone will be safe.
Right.
But the struggle that we have is that it's not that simple, right? And that's a hard thing to say to somebody that just wants those top 3 things. But really what we found is that you have to have a conversation about values in your community, you have to have a conversation about risk in your community, and you have to have a conversation about what are those things that you think are going to have the greatest impact. And that's where I think we as architects, we are blessed in our training, I think, because I think it makes us really big thinkers. We are taught to bring together diverse groups of people to solve wickedly complicated problems in beautiful and elegant ways. And I've come to realize that we as architects have a duty to do that beyond just buildings. And we need to help our clients and our communities think through issues like safety, think through issues like educational reform, through that lens, because I think it's a valuable tool to use in trying to think about problems in a different way.
Yeah, it's interesting how, as an architect, coming up with the problem definition, the ability to define the problem is so much broader today. If you want it to be, and it has to be. Otherwise, you can't design a truly effective school. You're going to be missing a portion of it. So to broaden that definition of what the problem is, you mentioned mental health.
Yeah.
Certainly is one. Bringing the counselor up and making that person more visible. All those things, they all are ingredients that come into play.
Yeah, it's interesting because Oftentimes as architects, we start with a design brief, right? We start with a design me a new elementary school, or I need this addition to this high school. And when you really look at the design thinking model, you're already a third of the way into that model when you get to that point. So we make it a practice to really back up and say, let's examine, first of all, is that really the problem we're here to solve? Sometimes that means we kind of talk ourselves out of work, which isn't necessarily great, but I think if what we're in business to do is to truly help communities solve problems, then we have to go there. And we have to ensure that we are elevating all the voices, even those that sometimes aren't well represented in a community, to go and find where those voices are, so that way we can have that conversation to look at, is this really the problem I'm solving, right? And then think about innovative ways in a time where resources are scarce, dollars are even more scarce. How do we ensure that what we're doing is the best that we can offer our communities? Yeah.
By the way, thanks for serving on the AIA committee. That's
thank you.
just another.
It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor.
Oh.
It is time consuming. I'm not going to lie about that. It is, but it's I think we do it because it's a labor of love, right? I think it's an incredible professional community of learners, and we just have a good time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope everybody will reach out to Karina at BRIC Architecture. And I just think your background and experience has really been wonderful. So
Well, thank you very much for
hope
having
others
me.
can benefit from it.
No, I thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.